Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what is going on? My name is Tom, and in today's video, we're going to be reviewing the episode 3 of The Last of Us, HBO's brand new series that is sweeping the globe, taking everybody's title for best zombie show right now, and it is again another sensational episode. Now, this episode is the first controversial episode, and I believe this is why. So we're going to talk about that just before we get into the full review, the full deep dive. Basically, this is the first episode of the series to take a complete 180 deviation from the main game's lore. We do not see any of Bill's mission from the game. Now, Bill has a tremendous arc in the game, a great early mission that's great fun, intense, and gives you a good backstory into Bill. The one character trait from Bill that we do get from the game is that he had a sort of connection to a guy called Frank. We know from a bit of a letter that we can find on that level and a little bit of light detail that we know that Bill and Frank must have been a couple at one point or another. Bill and Frank most certainly have been a couple. And Bill calls him his partner on the level. They find the skeleton of Frank hanging in a house, and they cut him down, and Joel and Bill share a little moment to discuss what happened, basically giving us the slight hint that Bill and Frank were a couple, a partner during the apocalypse, and things didn't turn out right between them. And in turn, Frank stole Bill's truck battery, did a runner, and ended up getting bitten a few times, and then inevitably hanging himself so he didn't have to turn. Now, that's a tragic story. It's really sad. It's heartwarming to feel that for Bill, considering when we meet him, he's a bit rough around the edges. He's a bit aggressive. He's a bit, thuggish and brutish towards Ellie and Joel. But deep down, he has got this level of complexity. Now, when the show was coming out, and we knew the actor behind Bill was going to be the fantastic Nick Offerman, and just to see the look of Bill in early promotional teasers and posters, it was great to see how accurate Bill was really looking on screen, on these posters and these promo videos. Bill looked iconic. It looked identical to Bill from the game, and it was a terrific casting. But I think a lot of people will be very disheartened in this episode to find that the Bill and Frank storyline is not like the game. The whole thing of going into the high school, fighting your first bloater, stealing the truck battery, getting overran by the infected, starting the car and driving it down the hill with Ellie, Bill and Joel as a little trio, that doesn't happen. Now, a lot of us were excited to see Nick Offerman as Bill because we thought of how accurate it looked, how good of an actor Nick Offerman is, and how well he would portray Bill on screen. And I think the problem with the episode that most people are creating is that it was the first episode brave enough to take a full deviation from the video game lore that we've been given. And unfortunately, it is a TV show. It's got the rights to do that. They've put a lot of money and time into this. The writers of Chernobyl as well are attached to this. It is not just shot for shot the game, even though we've been rewarded with some beautiful shot for shot imagery in the show, and we do get some of that in the conclusion to the episode. This was a completely unique episode, and I had no quarrels with it. A decade-long fan of The Last of Us that's played it over and over again, I had no problem with taking out that story from the game and reverting it into something different. We got to see Bill as a human. We got to see him as Bill, not as this character that just pops in for a couple of hours of the game. He was a fully fledged character. We see a start, a middle, and an end, and it's beautiful. It's dark. It's twisted. But it's nice. We got to see a lot of complexity from this angry, shouty, sometimes funny guy who turned out to be a bit of an arsehole in the game, but has a whole deeper side to him. I think the writers took a brave step forward to take this character and run with it in an opposite direction and sort of review and expand this one-man story from being a survivalist, as he calls himself in the episode, a sort of prepper. Someone who's a bit into his conspiracy theories, bunkering himself down into his residential neighborhood, and avoided death in the start of the apocalypse by not getting rounded up by the soldiers. He hid, and then when all of his neighbors were gone, he went out into the world and scavenged up some gear from other neighbors and from general stores. It was quite comical to see him survive so well, and then eventually his partner Frank ends up falling into one of his traps. And to see those traps in live action were iconic because we got to see them in the game, of course, and we got to see even more elaborate traps in the show. So the show didn't delete Bill. They didn't rewrite Bill. they just took what we knew about Bill and flipped it on its head a bit, turned it a bit more open, made it a bit more expansive, made it a bit more of a deep dive into this one man's character and his story. And it was cool to see Bill as a survivalist, a little bit eccentric at the beginning of the apocalypse, to then being right all the way through until he meets Frank and he becomes a bit more human. We also see his timidness when he meets Joel and Tess for the very first time. And also in this episode, we get to find out that Joel and Tess have been together for 16 years as a couple, air quotation marks, of course. It's not concrete, but one thing that is certainly a concrete couple is Frank and Bill, two people who found each other in the apocalypse, who did fall in love and shared many years together and lived their sort of perfect life in the apocalypse together. And they had highs and they had lows, but they fought through them, and they were shown in this episode. It was an odd but beautiful change for a person like myself, a heterosexual person, to see a story 99% driven by two gay characters. And it was a great story, a great love story. It was a great episode. It deviated from the game lore that I knew, but it expanded on it in a weird way. It was brave, and it was important to get that backstory for Bill. And I was sad to not see him in the action with Joel and Ellie. I would have liked to have seen him not grow old with Frank in a way. Like, he was given quite a poetic storyline, and I always felt Bill was more of a tormented and tortured soul. But Bill kind of gets to be complete in this version of The Last of Us. And it does show you that it's brave enough to take an alternative look at taking The Last of Us in a completely different direction from the game, even to the point where they're deleting whole levels from the game and recreating episodes out of some tiny bits of subplot that are now getting expanded out fully, which gives me hope for a season 2 that the infamous Abby and Joel go golfing meme doesn't become a reality. Personally, I think if they can rewrite this one whole episode to change the narrative, to change the sort of canon in this sort of what-if universe of The Last of Us, why can't they do that in part 2 with Joel and Ellie, and with Abby and Joel, and these storylines that we're looking a bit timid by coming up into a possible season 2. But for this episode, keeping it here somewhere that it's important, these two actors, Nick Offerman and a brand new actor to me that I've never seen on screen before, Murray, a brilliant actor who comes in and plays a great Frank, a Frank who we see literally in the game as a skeleton after taking himself out of this cruel world. We saw Frank as a survivalist, a person who appeared, fell into Bill's trap and fell into Bill's life, and Bill took him under his wing and became a couple with him, and these two had a love story far more intense than I would say some characters on The Walking Dead after several seasons. These guys managed to do it in one episode. So hats off to the writers, hats off to the actors. A great love story in a dark, bleak world. And even though some people will walk away from this and hate it because it was nothing to do with the game, I discredit that and disbelieve in that. That's your opinion, but I disagree completely. I think it was a subplot from the game that wasn't explored openly enough, and now it's been done justice. I think it was interesting for myself to watch this. I'd love to know what some of my fellow content creators who could maybe potentially identify as these two characters in a bit more of a deeper sense. I honestly, as a heterosexual male, I can only give my opinion on it. I'd like to see people from the LGBTQ give their opinions on this episode. I'm sad to see it getting review bombed on IMDb so badly, but I hope enough people give a positive review that it doesn't tank it too badly, because it's a great episode, and it, again, not one that I can personally identify with, but I saw a lot of love in this episode, and it was nice to also see a side to Joel and Tess from 2007, so this is a couple of years into the apocalypse, and it's been crazy, to see that in that episode, to see Joel as a younger guy in the apocalypse, and to also see Tess as a younger lady in the apocalypse. And it wasn't just about one person's love story, because we saw 3 different acts of love. We saw Frank and Bill develop through their characters and their story arc. We got to see a little inkling to Joel and Tess's life, Boston being taken over by the Fireflies and stuff. Early Joel and Tess in their relationship, or this hypothetical relationship. Frank and Bill's was a beautiful arc that we got to see from start, middle, and end, as tragic as it was, and as brilliant as it was. We also get to experience so much of these two characters within one episode. The same actors portraying their characters at different stages of their life due to the amazing hair and makeup department doing their job fantastically. We got to see these two actors portray the younger versions of themselves, slightly older versions of themselves, to then fully aged versions of themselves practically over the course of a couple of decades in the span of one episode. I've seen love stories that are like nearly 3 hours long that don't sell a relationship as well as this. It's beautifully done. And finally, the cherry on top for anyone who was complaining about the lack of video game accuracy, we got to see Ellie and Joel in this episode in the finale dress in their correct video game attire. The t-shirt is shot for shot perfection. And it was so cool to see Joel and Ellie starting to sort of sprout their relationship. Sprout, pardon the pun, with the fungus and stuff, but it was nice to see Ellie and Joel's relationship and dynamic beginning to build a bit more father and daughtery. I mean, we're 4 episodes deep. This is 3 episodes deep, into a season that we don't know how many episodes there are. Or I don't know at the time of filming how many episodes there are. But I don't mind them taking a little deviation away from the game's narrative, as long as they're willing to do that in other cases. Not just because this is a case that covers two sort of, I don't know how to politically say it, but two gay men who are having their love story throughout their episode. If the writers are willing to deviate from the game to show that narrative, I'm hoping that they're brave enough to deviate from other material that we as the community didn't get to see, didn't get to experience enough of, or disagreed with as a majority. I mean, we saw in the video game with Abby and Ellie in part 2, and Abby and Joel in part 2, and that whole arc of what happened. I'd be interested to see by the final episode what happens with Joel and the doctor in the room, this random doctor 10 years ago, who then all of a sudden for The Last of Us Part 2 became an important doctor because it was Abby's dad at the drop of a hat. I think it'd be nice to see the writers maybe fix that error, patch it up, or cement it if that's the direction they want to go in. I'm not sure, but I'm happy to see them have the balls, the courage, the audacity, the tenacious to deviate from the original source material and give us an episode that we'd not seen anything for. Like the first 2 episodes, I felt like I knew exactly where we were going, I knew exactly what was happening, and I could enjoy it as a video game player, watching it as a fan of the show. But I felt like I knew every beat for beat what was going to happen, and they gave me a little added extra scene here and there, which was nice. But this one was a full episode, nearly the whole episode. I didn't know what was happening next, because it not happened in the game, and that was a positive. That could have very easily been flipped on its head and been turned into a negative, but I think the way it was handled, the way it was written, the way it was acted, the way it was set up, I think it was great content, and I think it was a great challenge to see how well the audience would respond to that. And I hope it is something that the writers have continued to do. Obviously, all these episodes have been directed, written, and shot by now, so we don't make any changes on the fly. We can't change episode 4, by complaining about it online. So I think the trolls should just pack it in and just watch the series play out. But I liked it. I can say I have 10 years under my belt playing The Last of Us, and I can say with an open heart and an open chest that this deviation from the game was a bold, brave move in the right direction, and I think it was interesting. I still got to see my Joel and Ellie get dressed up like their video game counterparts, which I love seeing. I'm a massive nerd for those moments. But to see a whole section of new content, essentially a build DLC, was really cool, and I really appreciated that story. And even though I might not be able to relate to it wholeheartedly, I think I can appreciate for what it was, which was a beautiful love story between 2 survivors in a dark, brutal world. Thank you for watching, subscribe for more, and peace.
Switch up all the rules and imagine a utopia. Darling, I'm just so fed up with what does perfect even